Okay, let's continue.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, I wanted to end off by just asking you this. Can you think of any reason why witness 3 would potentially put his life in danger by fabricating this version?
Chairperson, at this stage, I don't want to object, but it is, with the greatest of respect, an unfounded statement that's put to the witness, and for him to answer that cannot be fair in any form or manner.
Well, I don't know if Mr. Mayberg had finished his question or proposition. Do you want to repeat it, Mr. Mayberg? Let me hear what it is.
I did want to ask Mr. Singh as to whether he could think of any reason why witness 3 might potentially put his life in danger by fabricating a version against Mr. Singh. That's all I wanted to ask.
Chairperson, my objection is to the first part of the question. It is a bit of a loaded question, and especially in the manner in which it's put to the witness. As you yourself said on many occasions, you're here to interrogate the veracity of something. We can't just make statements where we have no factual foundation for it.
Maybe let me put it this way. Mr. Singh, you have said that you and witness 3 were in good terms, had a cordial relationship. Is that right?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Do you know of any reason why he would want to portray you in such a bad light with regard to the Gupta family, your alleged relationship with them, and say that you visited them and came out with bags? I think he says, you must just correct me if I'm missing something, which later on I think he says he, at least on one occasion, found you had money, and that he visited with you, or you visited Knoxvold, when in fact there were no such visits at all. Or is your answer the one you gave earlier, namely, you think that somebody within the commission fed him information and influenced him to falsely implicate you in this, and maybe somebody in Transnet pressured him to make these false allegations against you?
Mr. Chair, my response would be that my view in terms of the motive behind witness 3's allegations, or the motive behind his allegations, could only stem from the fact that he was concerned about job security and bowed to the pressure that he had alluded to that he was under in the telephone call with myself.
And maybe if you do have a name or names, don't mention them now, maybe we can look at the names later. Is there somebody at Transnet that you think would really want you to be falsely implicated by witness 3 in things that you were not involved in? Do you know of somebody who would really desire that at Transnet?
Mr. Chair, I do not have a name.
You do not have a name?
I do not have a name.
Yes.
And I don't think I will ever come up with a name.
Yes, okay.
Because I'm not in the business of speculation or tarnishing people's credibility and images.
Yes.
But as you will see, Mr. Chair, in the course of leading the evidence to the Commission, you will find that there will be a continuous, how can I say, challenging of the evidence that presented to drive a certain narrative. Who and why that was done, Mr. Chair, I don't know. I do not wish to know. But my obligation to you is to come here and point out these differences. And to the extent I can, to the best of my ability, I do so.
I don't know whether, Mr. Mybeck, you...
Now, I just have two more questions on this, if I may. Mr. Singh, could I ask you please to go to page 135, paragraph 72.1, where witness 3 says that I'm concerned about my own and my family's safety and security, specifically during and after my testimony. I presume you can't comment on that.
I cannot, but to the extent that I never threatened witness 3, and I will never do so.
And then just one last thing. It came to light in the Commission's proceedings earlier this week, and you might have read about this, that there was allegedly an attempt on witness 1's life. Did you read about that?
I did so.
Could I ask you then, please, to turn to
Sorry, Mr. Chair, are we done with witness 3, sir?
yes, we are done with witness 3.
I was just wanting to make a comment under your general
Sure.
analysis of witness 3's statement in its entirety. Mr. Chair, I would just like to point you to paragraph 20 of his affidavit, which is on page 125. And it relates to the period when witness 3 was providing services to Minister Gigaba. And you will notice that it's a period between July and December 2013. If you then move on to page 126 and paragraph 22, one would then note that witness 3 is waiting in a vehicle at the residence and describes certain individuals that he sees. At paragraph 21.1, 21.2, 21.3, and 21.4. Mr. Chair, my point that I would like to try and make here is, as it relates to Mr. Molefe and Mr. Ngubani, in my view, I think they are public figures and witness 3 would be able to recognize them in 2013. My personal view is, in 2013, I did not know who Mr. Machela Koko was. I only really got to know him. If I saw him in this room, I would have not recognized him in 2013. Equally so, Mr. Chair, Ms. Linda Mobaso, the former chairperson of Transnet, I did not know her, I don't know her, until she was the chairperson of Transnet, because she was ostensibly not a public figure. The reason why I raise this is because witness 3 recognizes these people way back when in 2013. Yet, these people become public figures in 2015. So it's just another anomaly that I thought I should bring to the attention.
So you raised the question of how he may have known
How did he make this connection?
all of these people.
At that time.
Yeah, okay. Mhm. You are obviously not in a position to positively say he did not know them then, but you are just raising an issue to say it would be interesting to know how he knew people that, as far as you are concerned, were not in the public eye.
Especially, Mr. Chair, and in particular, Ms. Linda Mabaso, because he refers to her as the chairperson of Transnet.
But was she not the chairperson of Transnet at the time?
No.
She became
She became chairperson of Transnet sometime, I think, if I'm not after, in 2015 or so.
Okay. Okay. Was that the only point? Oh, okay.
So that was my only point, sir.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
I'm going to come back to...
I think it might be useful to get witness 3 to comment on the point raised,
Yes,
maybe by way of an affidavit.
as you please,
Yeah,
Chairperson.
yeah.
Mr. Singh, I'm going to come back to the evidence of witness 3, and I'm going to come back to the allegations that you went to the Guptas, the allegation that you collected money and that you deposited it at Knox Vaults. Once I've completed my examination of you and dealt with the transaction advisors, the awarding of tenders, etc., I'll come back to that at the end. If I could ask you, please, to turn back to your exhibit, BB23A.
Can I return this one?
The drivers you can put away, yes.
Mr. Maybeck, at some stage you intimated that Mr. Singh's affidavit of today might be admitted after lunch or something.
It has been included in your bundle now.
Yes,
DCJ.
okay. Do you want it to be admitted as an exhibit?
Yes,
formally
thank you.
now or later? As long as you don't forget, you might do it later if that's convenient.
All right. My junior will remind me, perhaps we could do that just before we break. And I'm
Yeah.
indebted to you, Chairperson.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Singh, could I ask you to turn to the second 10.6 directive that was issued to you? That you'll find at page 420.
What's the page number again?
420, Chairperson.
420.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at 421, you see you were told to deliver within 7 weeks of receipt hereof to the Secretary or Acting Secretary of the Commission at the address given, etc., the declaration in which you specifically address your involvement in or knowledge of the following. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
If I could ask you then to turn to page 425, amongst the issues that you were asked to address under that head, at the foot of the page, paragraph 1.12. Do you see that?
I do so, sir.
You were asked to address the frequency and reasons for visits to the Saxonwold residence of the Gupta family.
I do so, sir.
Now, let us turn to your answer. That you find at page 1500. And if I can direct your attention, please, to paragraph 300, you see under the heading Add Para 1.12. You see that?
Yes, sir.
You say at paragraph 300, the only person stroke witness that places me at the Saxonwold residence of the Guptas is witness 3. In respect of witness 3's evidence, I wish to state that I deny his assertion that I visited the Gupta residence as alleged. I do not believe that a finding can be made that he's a credible witness, especially based on his performance under cross-examination on Monday, 8 March 2021. 301, moreover, I wish to point out that there's not sorry, there is no iota of objective evidence to substantiate his allegation pertaining to my visit to the Saxonwold residence of the Guptas. 302, insofar as I might not have been made aware of any other persons making similar allegations, I'll deal with same if and when the Commission produces the evidence in this regard. 303, I do not believe it is fair to ask me to answer to unsubstantiated allegations, speculation and innuendo. Right? That's what you said, correct?
Correct, sir.
Where do you tell the chairperson you are under a summons about the frequency and reasons for your visit to the Saxonwold residence?
Sorry, I don't understand your question, sir.
You were asked in what was a summons to tell the Commission about your frequency and reasons for visit to the Saxonwold residence.
Yes, sir.
You don't do that.
I guess it's an omission, sir, but I've made full disclosure to you now, which I apologize for, sir.
Mr. Singh, you were issued with a summons to answer that question. And you'll end up saying at 303, I do not believe it is fair to ask me to answer to unsubstantiated allegations, speculation and innuendo. What were you talking about there?
This is the allegations relating to, or the inferences that are drawn as it relates to individuals that visit the Saxonwold residence.
But why, why did you not tell the chairperson? Because of course we're not dealing with witness 3 there. You were given a 10-6 to deal with witness 3. Here you were asked about the frequency and reasons for your visits. Why didn't you, in this affidavit, if you were going to be completely transparent, why didn't you simply tell the chairperson what you said when I started asking you questions? And I asked you, how many times did you go there and why did you go there? Why didn't you put in your affidavit that when I went there about 10 times to attend religious and cultural functions? Why didn't you say that?
As I said, Mr. Chair, I think it was an omission on my part, which I apologize for.
An omission on your part.
Yes, sir.
Well, one gets the impression from your answer here that it was not an oversight on your part not to give this information, because you were being asked to indicate how many times you may have visited the Gupta residence and what the reasons were for your visits. Your answer seems to object to being asked those questions. You say, I do not believe it is fair to ask me to answer to unsubstantiated allegations, speculation, and innuendo. But you're simply being asked, to the extent that you may have visited the Gupta residence, tell us how many times and what were the reasons. That's what you are being asked. And your answer seems to be, don't ask me about that. You accept this interpretation of your answer.
Chairperson, again, I don't wish to object, but I think the answer in the affidavit must be read in the context of who he responds to. It's not like it's suggested by Mr. Maibek that that response relates to the frequency of the visits to the Gupta residence. I think the witness tried to make that point and say, I deal with this in relation to the heading that's there.
Yes, no, but this is a directive it seeks certain information. And in his answer, he does say, add paragraph 1.12 of the Regulation 10.6 Directive. It's not an answer to an affidavit. It's a question that's being put by the chairperson to you through a directive to get information as part of the commission's investigation. You understand that? Do you want to say anything about my interpretation that your answer to seems to be, don't ask me about that?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. Mr.
Well,
Maybeck?
Perhaps I could just ask you one more question. If you read 300 to 303,
Yes, sir.
the net effect is you telling the chairperson that you've never been to the Guptas.
No, sir.
Well, if you read it, you say the only person who places me there is witness 3, and he's not to be believed. So the net effect is you didn't go there.
No, sir, I would not. If that was the case, I would have not led the testimony I led.
But-
Actually, I'm sorry. Actually, Mr. Singh, if you were to look at paragraph 301, you say, moreover, I wish to point out that there is no iota of objective evidence to substantiate his allegation pertaining to my visit to the Saxon World residence of the Guptas. That seems to me to be saying any allegation that I've visited the Guptas is not substantiated, as opposed to saying, look, I've been to the Guptas, but not under the circumstances that he says I went there.
Mr. Chair, I might be misunderstanding you, but I think the response in paragraph 301 relates to the allegations that he was making to my visits.
Yes, Mr. Maybe.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson.
But of course, I'm sure you accept that it would have been better for you to say, well, I deny the allegations that I visited the Gupta residence under the circumstances that he outlines, but I did go there for cultural occasions or religious occasions. So visiting there is not denied. It's visiting there under the circumstances that he gives that is being denied. I'm sure that would have been much better, isn't it?
Concede that that would be a better way to contextualize the subjects.
Okay. Mr. Maybeck?
Yes, thank you. DCJ, whilst we're in this file, we were at page 1500. Could I ask you, perhaps I should just deal with the affidavit now because it's in the same file.
That's fine, yeah, that's fine.
Mr. Singh, could you please go to page 1507?
1507.
1507. There you find an affidavit. If you go to page 1 of yours, go to page 1539. That's the signature page, and it contains a series of annexures that run up until 1563. Would you confirm that?
Yes.
Now, if you go back to page 1539, would you confirm that you swore to this affidavit on the 12th day of March, 2021?
I do, sir.
That was presumably earlier this morning.
Yes, sir.
And would you confirm the truth and accuracy of this affidavit?
I do, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairperson, if I could ask you please to admit Mr. Singh's affidavit that commences at page 1507 as Exhibit BB 23.8.
Mr. Arnold Singh's affidavit, starting at page 1507, is admitted as an exhibit and will be marked as Exhibit BB 23.8.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, on these 10 or so occasions that you went to the Gupta residence, who did you see there?
Mr. Chair, other than the family that was present and other invitees, no one of significance or that I recall.
Well, did you, for example, see Mr. Malefe there? By his own admission, he went often, including to family functions.
I don't recall.
You can't recall anyone that worked at Transnet there on those 10 occasions?
Not off hand, Mr. Chair. As I said, it was probably 10 occasions over a period of 5 to 6 years, so I don't.
All right, I want to turn to another topic, and that relates to the Manganese expansion project. Could I ask you please to turn to Transnet Bundle 4 behind you and Exhibit 19.
Somebody
Sorry,
must
sir, you
help
said
the
four?
witness, please.
Someone will help you now.
You might wish to repeat the bundle, Mr. Mybeck. I think your junior might not have heard.
Transnet Bundle 4, Exhibit 9, yeah, 4A. Sorry, 4A, Michelle. Page 31.
The black numbers, no?
Yes. So this is the affidavit of Mr. Henk Bester. You will recall that at the time he worked for Hatch Consulting.
Did you say 21 or 31?
I wanted to go to 31, but then I see that I inadvertently went to the start of the statement. So it actually starts at page 24.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay,
Oh,
but you will go to 31, that's where your questions.
Yes.
Okay, I am
Yeah.
at 31.
All right.
Sorry.
So let's starts at 24.
The black numbers.
BB 19.
Yes, use the black numbers, check on the spine whether it's the correct
Mr.
one.
Singh, BB 19, I can see it from here. It's the next divider.
Okay, maybe let's start afresh, Mr. Singh. The first thing is to check if it's the right bundle, and you will see that on the spine where it says this one is Transnet Bundle 4, Transnet Bundle 4, and then you go to the right page, and I think the right page is 31. Have you got it? Have you got it? The black 31.
So we're going to 31, sir?
Sorry, Mr. Singh.
Are we going to 31?
Yes. This is the affidavit or statement of Mr. Henk Bester. You've read it presumably, and you've read it carefully.
Yes, sir.
And you've noted that there are many references to you in this statement.
Correct, sir.
You've noted as well that he alleges that you attended a meeting together with Mr. Esser.
I do, sir.
So I want to then deal with those passages, if I could.
Sure.
The first paragraph where you implicated is paragraph 23 at page 31. And he says that on the 26th of July, I met with Rudy Besson, Transnet Capital Projects director at the time, to inform him of the visit that I had from Padiachi and Reddy. and the apparent insight they seem to have into Transnet matters as outside companies.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I apologize for interrupting Mr. Mabik, but I seem to have a cramp.
Sorry?
I seem to have a cramp on my leg. Is it just
Oh, is that
possible
so?
to just take a
Short
2-minute
break.
break? 2 minutes.
Okay, all right. Let's adjourn for 5 minutes. We adjourn. Are you feeling better, Mr. Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right. Let's continue, Mr. Member.
Thank you. So, Mr. Singh, we were at page 33 of Transnet Bundle 4A, Exhibit 19. Sorry, page 31, paragraph 23. So I'm going to fast forward this a little bit. What Mr. Bester says is that he has a meeting together with Mr. Basson and Ms. Strader. That's what he says at 23. At 24, he says that Basson told me that Singh wanted a confinement approval condition included, which stipulated that PM Africa and DEC would form part of the SD component for Phase 1. According to Basson, him and Mr. Gerrit Bierman, CFO of TCP, told Singh that it would not be advisable to stipulate specific companies to be used in SD initiatives. Basson said that this condition was subsequently dropped. Do you have any comment on that paragraph?
Mr. Chair, firstly, in terms of the paragraph 24, we note that there is no confirmatory affidavit that is submitted of Mr. Basson to this extent. In addition, Mr. Chair, Mr. Basson does correctly state that the stipulation, as suggested by Mr. Bester, was in fact dropped.
Well, the question is, what do you have to say about the statement that by Mr. Hempester that Mr. Basson told him that you wanted a confinement approval condition
Okay.
included, which stipulated that PM Africa and DC should form part of the SD component. You have said that there is no confirmatory affidavit by Basson. Is that where you stop? Or you would say, yes, I know about that, I did speak to Basson, or you say you did not say that to Basson?
Mr. Chair, the context behind this issue emanates from the fact that the issue of SD and SD being supply development or empowerment, as you would describe it, was a particular problem within the environment within which Mr. Basson and Mr. Bierman operated. They operated in a division of Transnet called Transnet Capital Projects. And Transnet, as a state-owned company, has an obligation and is contained in its, shareholder compact with the minister and so on, in the corporate plan as well, that it would advance the empowerment and supply development objectives. And this comment was made in that context, primarily because of the fact that the Transnet Capital Projects, as the name suggests, was involved in construction-related activity. And one of the issues that was highlighted relating to empowerment and supply development was that Transnet Capital Projects was relatively lagging behind because of the specialist nature of the work that is conducted by the construction company or the engineering consultants. So in this case, Mr. Chair, we're talking about the Manganese expansion project. Now, the Manganese expansion project, after the locomotive project, was probably one of the biggest projects that Transnet would undertake. It was, I think, in the region of about 20 billion, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of the estimated total cost or the budget. So we really saw this as an opportunity to be able to drive supply development using this project as it relates to the size and the magnitude of the project. So this is the context within which this request was made. from a procurement procedure manual perspective, which is the document that guides the procurement within Transnet, it would not allow that. So from that perspective, it was used as an example for Mr. Basson and Mr. Bierman, because Mr. Bierman was the chairperson of the acquisition council at Transnet Capital Projects, to be able to explore opportunities, options, alternatives, to be able to improve TCP's SD scores, to enable them to be aligned more to our targets, and also then try and transform the engineering and the construction industry space as it relates to supply development. So it was not a direct instruction to say, listen, you must do this. As Mr. Basson concedes, that once Mr. Bierman and Mr. Basson had briefed me regarding their deliberations, the idea was dropped. The issue was I was trying to convey to them the seriousness with which they need to look at this aspect to allow us to be able to meet Transnet's objectives.
Okay, so the answer is yes, you did make that statement, but you are saying, yeah, you are providing the context within which you made it. Mr. Mayberg?
Yes, so the hearsay and the lack of a confirmatory affidavit, it's not a non-issue because you accept you said this. This is what you wanted.
As to whether I said it to Mr. Basson or Mr. Bierman, that I'm not too sure.
Well, Mr. Bierman, we know that he put in an affidavit and he deals with it as well. So just so that we understand this, you wanted a confinement approval condition, you must correct me if I'm wrong, included which stipulated that PM Africa and DEC should form part of the SD component for phase 1.
No, that I deny, Mr. Chair.
What did you want?
As I've explained, Mr. Chair, I wanted them to explore opportunities, alternatives, or methods to enable Transnet Capital Projects to meet its mandates as it relates to transformation and supply development. As an example, I said, why don't you explore this?
You would accept that it would be improper to impose on someone like Hatch the appointment of particular SD partners?
Yes, I would.
All right. So let's go to paragraph 25.
Well, maybe I should say this in fairness to you, Mr. Singh. You see, when you said Mr. Basson had not provided a confirmatory affidavit, it came across as you were denying or you were going to dispute that you made that statement.
Mr. Chair, I dispute the context of the statement that I requested DEC
Yes,
to be or to be SD partners of
yes,
Hatch.
okay,
My view has always been supply development partners are the choice of the main contractor.
yes.
All right. Then at 25, later that same day, I received a call from Basson, says Bester, who requested that Hatch sign the MOU with PM Africa and DEC. Basson did not give me a reason for this request, and I would be speculating if I were to say I knew the reason. I can only imagine that there must have been pushback when he informed Singh of what I had told him about Padiachi and Reddy approaching Hatch. Singh must have insisted that the MOU be signed. You want to comment on that?
Mr. Chair, I deny this allegation, and on Mr. Bester's own version, he's speculating as to what the reason could be. Secondly, as Mr. Bester already conceded in paragraph 23, which I was led on, the requirement was not even enforced.
So you accept, though, or do you dispute that Mr. Bester was requested to sign an MOU with PM Africa and DEC?
Mr. Chair, I cannot comment on that. I was not party to those discussions between Mr. Bester and DEC or PM Africa. I do not recall this request. The request never came from me.
And let's get to paragraph 29 at page
I think
30.
also, sorry, just one further comment. Mr. Chair, at the outset, I would like to draw the Commission's attention to one fact. These interactions, whether it be Mr. Basson with Mr. Bester and Mr. Bester with Ms. Stradom, because I'm sure we're going to be left with Ms. Stradom's evidence as well, is highly irregular in its nature. Because these things are actually happening, as the Chair will see, these things are happening as a tender process for the provision of these EPCM services are unfolding. So it's highly irregular for Mr. Bester to engage in this type of behavior. Equally for Mr. Basson and for Ms. Stradom, given the positions that they held in the project. Mr. Bester would have reported to Mr. Basson as a Transnet equivalent. Ms. Stradom was the project manager relating to the MEP project, the Manganese expansion project. So they held very senior positions. And for them to be interacting with Mr. Bester, a potential service provider, on these matters during a live procurement process is highly irregular.
Mr. Singh, perhaps I could just ask you to keep that bundle open and move to Mr. Bester's affidavit, sorry, Mr. Bierman's affidavit. This is Transnet Bundle 4, Exhibit BB21. B.
This one? And this one?
I ask you please to turn to page 928. Just in relation to your evidence that you weren't proposing specific SD partners, you would have seen at paragraph 18 at 928 that Mr. Bierman says that he gave you feedback via a WhatsApp.
Indeed, sir.
And it says, Anoj, on manganese confinement, my procurement team wants to strangle me. The view is that by designating a specific company as SD or subcontracting the process will fail fairness, transparency, and equitable test. We have considered options and investigated this previously. It would be great to do this, but we are not allowed to. If Transnet chooses to go this route, we will still have to apply this consistently. You see that?
I do, sir.
Does it not appear from that WhatsApp that you were proposing specific SD partners?
Again, Mr. H, it comes back to the issue of me requesting a principle to be explored or alternatives to be explored. And later on, you will see that there is a long WhatsApp message from Mr. Bierman again dealing with this topic. But again, from that WhatsApp message, you will see that the issue that was being discussed was an issue of principle.
Well, the question is whether, when you read paragraph 18 of Mr. Bierman's affidavit with the quotation of that message, WhatsApp
Sorry,
message,
Mr. Chair.
you can't hear.
Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry. You see, I'm used to a situation where everybody hears me because my voice is rather loud. But
Sorry,
of
sir.
late, there have been complaints that I can't be heard. So, okay. No, I was saying, Mr. Maibek's question to you was whether you don't concede that a reading of paragraph 18 of Mr. Perryman's affidavit with that quotation of a WhatsApp message, you don't concede that it appears that you had spoken to him about designating a specific company as a subcontractor or SD. Just from the message in that paragraph.
Mr. Chair, this again refers to a principal, correct? It doesn't mention them by name.
Well, the second sentence says, the view is that by designating a specific company as SD or subcontracting the process, the subcontracting process will fail fairness, transparency, and equitable tests. That sentence comes after the first sentence where he says, Arnold, on Manganese confinement, my procurement team wants to strangle me.
Agreed, sir.
Why do they want to strangle him? It would seem on the face of it that it's because of the view which he is contained, which he refers to in his second sentence, because of the view that a specific company must be designated as SD or subcontractor. So since he's writing to you,
yes,
it gives the impression, prima facie, at least to me, that he is writing to you because you are the one who may have wanted that a specific company be designated as SD. So the question from Mr. Myberg was whether you don't concede that a reading of this message suggests that.
Mr. Chair, I concede that after reading the
second
first sentence of
The
paragraph
first and
18,
second, yes,
which says,
okay.
after concluding our profile of the two companies,
Yes,
which I would assume is DEC and there is one other.
yeah,
I can't remember its name.
yeah. Okay, all right. Mr. Myberg?
So now you concede what?
That there was a request from me to profile two companies.
Right, I see. So, Mr. Singh, can I just perhaps, I meant actually to start out by asking you more general questions. Was there a time when you were employed at Transnet where you became at least suspicious of the fact that this SD partner, provision for SD partners was being exploited and manipulated?
I don't recall the exact events.
Yes, but you've no doubt reflected carefully on your time at Transnet. Backwards, not so?
You mean since I left?
Yes,
And in terms of how things have now unfolded?
yes.
Okay, yes.
And you've paid attention to evidence that's been given. Do you have any sense at the time that there were problems with SD partners and that they were being used in an irregular way?
No, sir. I don't think I can agree with you on that.
No, I'm not asking you to agree. I'm asking you, did you have a sense? Do you have any suspicion that SD partners were being used in an irregular way?
No, sir.
Now, in relation to this affidavit of Mr. Bester, as I understand it, you want to essentially delete your involvement.
Sorry, sir?
You say you were not involved. I mean, essentially, when you take issue with the places where you referred to.
Yes.
But you accept from an overall perspective, this reflects a very serious situation, doesn't it, of an abuse of the SD partner process.
On whose side, sir?
What Mr. Bester's version.
In terms of the actions of DEC, or the actions of Transnet, or the actions of Hatch?
Well, I think Mr. Myberg, what he's asking is when you say, when you ask him whether he doesn't accept that this evidence reflects reflects an abuse of the system, I think he wants to know abuse by whom. I think you wanted to know abuse by
Yes,
whom. Is
exactly.
that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Well, certainly by the SD partners.
Mr. Chair, in terms of, I can't comment on the actions of DEC or any other SD partner that I've not engaged with, but certainly the environment is one where people would ordinarily understand that there are projects that are about to be launched by Transnet, whether it be locomotives, whether it be the Manganese expansion project, the port expansion project, the pipeline project, and they know when these, RFPs go out into the market, and they engage actively with potential service providers. And that's as far as I know as to how this industry operates. Like in all industries, maybe there are people that, are unscrupulous and would probably use it for other purposes. But if you look at this specific example, as we, from a Transnet perspective, we wanted to advance the objectives of enhancing the SD criteria, and we achieved that. Hatch was appointed, they agreed to a 50% threshold, and it came with no premium. So from a Transnet's perspective, we achieved all of the objectives that we wanted, and it was a desirable outcome for us as Transnet.
Whilst we, in the Bierman file, if you still have it there, could you turn to page 935, please?
Yes, sir.
Here you see that Mr. Bierman sends you, it seems, a profiling of DEC, is that correct?
Correct.
That's what you wanted him to do, to profile this particular SD partner.
And apparently one other.
Yes. All right, if we go back then to paragraph 29 at page 33 of bundle 4A.
This is Bester.
So paragraph 29, on or about 1 August.
So hang on. We're going back to Mr. Bester's one.
Mr. Bester's affidavit, yes.
So paragraph 29.
29.
Yes, sir.
On or about 1 August, I received a call from Padiachi who indicated he would like to see me again. We agreed to meet on 5 August 2013. At the meeting, Padiachi and Reddy advised that the confinement approval was imminent, but Hatch needed to sign an addendum to the MOU that Hatch had amended before confinement could be finalized. It was clear that they were not happy with Hatch's proposed amendments. I understood this to mean that either Singh would not approve the confinement in order for Molefe to give final approval. Alternatively, both Molefe and Singh would not give the necessary approvals. You want to comment on that?
Mr. Chair, I deny the allegations contained in this paragraph. It is clearly and patently obvious that Mr. Bester is speculating again. He does not, when he is confronted by Padiachi and the other gentlemen, he does not inquire from them as to why they say this. So he's now professing an spurious allegation that implicates myself and Mr. Molefe.
All right. So let's then go, please, to paragraph 35.
Sorry.
Now we need to just give some context to this. At paragraph 34, on the morning of Wednesday, 7 August, Gray and I met with Stradum at Woodmead to advise her more fully of the situation. This resulted in Stradum calling Shisheka, General Counsel for TFR at the time. Shisheka requested that we, Gray, Stradum and me, come to the Colton Centre immediately to brief her. We met Shisheka at the Wimpy at Colton Centre and provided her with a full debrief of what had transpired up to date. Shisheka indicated that Hatch had done the right thing to elevate the matter to TFR. We showed Shisheka the proposed addendum by Padiachi and Reddy, which he photographed using an iPad. Shisheka then indicated that she will inform the right people at Transnet and that Hatch should take no further steps. She further advised that Hatch should send her in due course an affidavit via email to a private Gmail account setting out exactly what had transpired. 35, so that's the background. However, I was later informed by Stradom that the matter was elevated to Singh, who considered the matter closed and that no further action is to be taken. This was the same message that Stradom told me she received from Bauer. Do you want to comment on that?
Mr. Chair, again, I would just like to highlight that it is, again, very irregular for now, not even Mr. Bester, but Mr. Gray, who is even more senior than Mr. Bester, to engage in, again, these discussions with Ms. Stradom during a period of time when this is a live procurement event that is being conducted. There are every single Transnet tender that is issued with a qualification or a highlight or emphasizes the fact that if there are any issues relating to any irregularities that anyone finds, whether it be on the employer side, whether it be on the employee side. When I say employer, I'm talking about it in EPCM terms. They are compelled to report this through the Transnet tip-off anonymous hotline.
Well, assuming you're right, I mean, do you think that adds or subtracts from this version?
Sorry?
Do you think it adds or subtracts from Mr. Bester's version?
Mr. Chair, it actually subtracts from Mr. Bester's version because he was aware of the appropriate procedure to use.
But he's nevertheless telling his story, Mr. Singh, and perhaps I could just ask you, you've already given us that version, you've told us of the irregularities. Can you now deal with paragraph 35, where you referred to?
Mr. Chair, I have not mentioned any irregularities that involve myself.
No, I'm not suggesting that. But you've told us about how you think Mr. Bester conducted himself in an irregular fashion.
Yes, and I'm highlighting it now that even a more senior person in Hatch is engaging in the same activities.
Deal with paragraph 35.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yes.
But
It is late on Friday, but really the purpose of this is for you to answer the paragraphs where you implicated.
But that's the reason I go back to 34, is that the avenues that Ms. Stradom was also aware of was that she should have followed the Transnet tip-off anonymous hotline. There is a record of this. It is outsourced. It was outsourced, I think, to Deloitte, one of the companies, to be able to take record of these things. There was a complete policy in how these issues must be dealt with. So if this complaint, as it is recorded in paragraph 35, for example, reached the tip-off anonymous hotline, that tip-off would have been automatically escalated to Mr. Molefe and escalated to the chairman of the audit committee.
Could I ask you please to answer paragraph 35?
Based on what I've said, I am responding to paragraph 35 by saying I do not believe that was Mr. Bower's response.
What about yours? However, I later informed by Stradom that the matter was elevated to Singh, who considered the matter closed. That's really what I'm trying to ask you to deal with.
But that is my point, sir.
Right.
If there were irregularities that they were responding to,
Yes.
they would have not raised it with me. I was the one that was implicated. There would have been alternatives that they would have explored, which is the tip-off anonymous hotline. Ms. Stradom has access to Mr. Gama, who is her direct report.
Who it was raised with was Shasheka, the general counsel of TFR.
Exactly. So that is my point. If she did not get an appropriate response, and this, which is being elevated to me, the implicated person, and me making a decision about what implicates me and closing the matter, in my view, is an inappropriate response. So she should have went and elevated it to Mr. Gama.
I'm sorry, Mr. Singh. Is it true or is it not true that the matter was elevated to you and you were going to consider, and you considered the matter closed?
Mr. Chair, the matter was never elevated to me.
Okay, all right. Mr. Maitland.
Thank you. Perhaps I could deal just with one more paragraph. At 47, please, at page 41, paragraph 47.
47. Yes, sir.
To the best of my knowledge, says Bester, to the best of my recollection, the meeting with Peter, which was set up to include Singh, was held on 22 October 2013. Next, a meeting invite from Peter as HB 14. This meeting was attended by Gray and me and started almost an hour late after Singh had not arrived. Peter said that Singh requested that he speaks to us as he, Singh, was busy. But we could see him, Singh, pacing up and down in his office and even pass us on his way to the restroom. Do you have anything to say about that?
Mr. Chair, again, I do not have a direct recollection of this meeting, but I assume that the meeting did occur because Mr. Bester attaches a meeting invite for that meeting. Given the date of this meeting in the procurement, in the timeline of the procurement events that was unfolding in terms of the award to Hatch, I can only understand that this meeting, the subject matter of this meeting, was not for us to discuss DEC and whether they included or excluded. This meeting was particularly called for Hatch to understand the need for us to meet a 50% SD threshold and for them to actually agree that the 100 or 150 million or 200 million premium that they had included in the tender for that criteria was unacceptable. And that is the reason why Mr. Peter, who was the Chief Procurement Officer at the time, attended that meeting.
You feel you've answered that paragraph?
Sorry?
You feel you've answered what I put to you?
You read this paragraph and you asked me what my comments are.
Thank you. And then finally, can I just take you please to page 44?
Sorry, page 44.
Yes, we can fast forward a lot of this. Paragraphs 54, 55, 56, your name is mentioned, but effectively what is contended is that Mr. Reddy has set up a meeting with you, and I want to get to that meeting at paragraph 57. On my arrival at Melrose Arch, as I walked towards the restaurant, I was met by a gentleman who introduced himself as Mr. Salim Issa. He said that he was there to meet with us as part of the discussion with Singh and needed to see if the restaurant is clean. I asked him where Mr. Singh was, and he said he will call him when Issa is ready. I asked Issa whether he himself works for Transnet, and he responded that he is, quote, doing a lot of things, unquote, or something to that effect of, I have a lot of businesses. He clearly had no intention of answering my question in detail. I was surprised at the time that as soon as Issa called Singh, Singh arrived a few minutes later. You want to comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Mr. Chair, I deny the allegations contained in this paragraph as it's made by Mr. Bester, and I do so for the following reasons. Mr. Chair, as Mr. or Advocate Myberg has introduced this paragraph, he makes reference to 54, 55, and 56. These paragraphs lead to an understanding of how this meeting came about. So, by and large, Mr. Bester's version, this meeting came about as a result of the fact that Hatch was having a problem in settlement of their invoices with Transnet Capital Projects. At the time, Transnet Capital Projects was involved in the new multi-product pipeline project. And those are the invoices that they had a problem being settled. I don't recall the exact issue. I do not recall the fact that they were not paid, but that is what Mr. Bester says. Now, there's two issues there. The first issue is, Mr. Bester, in terms of his title, was a director for rail. Okay? Now, why would a director for rail try and settle ostensibly pipeline invoices, which I would assume within the Hatch hierarchy would be dealt with by somebody else? Secondly, he references two other colleagues of his that were invited to this meeting. He does not attach any meeting invites for these two other individuals. As in an organization as big as Hatch, you would expect that these things would happen as a matter of course through invites or email invites. He did attach in the meeting with Mr. Peter, as we've just heard, a meeting invite. He does not attach the same here. Secondly,
I think you mean thirdly.
thirdly, he attends the meeting on his own admission, on his own, allegedly with the CFO of Transnet to discuss disputed invoices for a person that is emanating from the rail business unit, to discuss disputed invoices related to a pipeline project without the benefit of any finance people from Hatch.
So, Mr. Singh, did you attend the meeting with Mr. Issa or not?
Mr. Myberg, I've denied the allegations in its entirety, and I'm explaining to you why I've done so.
Well, perhaps we should first start with that. He says that the meeting was called, Mr. Issa was there, Mr. Issa called you and you arrived at the meeting.
Mr. Chair, I deny that the meeting was called. I deny that Mr. Issa was there. I deny that I met Mr. Bester for the reasons he sets out, for the reasons that I alluded to. It is even further very spurious, or again, it questions Mr. Bester's objectives or character. Having highlighted all of the issues that he highlighted in terms of the manner in which DEC was dealing with him on the confinement matter, he now seeks assistance from Mr. Pariachi to be able to resolve a problem for him. And you will see, Mr. Chair, as we go through the phase 2, you find a similar problem in that the very same DEC that Hatch is now complaining about is included as part of Manganese phase 2 as a subcontractor. And that is after 2 additional interactions with Mr. Essa, or alleged interactions with Mr. Essa.
Mr. Chairman, I see that it's 10 to 4. If this is an appropriate time to adjourn.
Yeah, no, I think let's adjourn. Mr. Mulefe is done except a very limited portion
Yes.
of his evidence that he must still deal with. Then Mr. Singh still has quite a lot to deal with. What is your estimate of how much time you will need with Mr. Singh?
2 days.
About 2 days?
Yes.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'll try and find 2 days somewhere.
And then please, Chairperson, don't forget about Mr. Gama.
Yes, Mr. Gama too. And what's your estimate?
I think it could also be 2 days.
Oh, 2 days. Okay. I'll have to do a miracle and find these
DCJ,
4
we of
days
course
somewhere.
are flexible, and I'm sure we can
Yes.
convince our
Yes.
opponents to sit at night and then to
Yes,
get squeezed
yes,
into
yes.
those night sessions if that would be more convenient for you.
Yeah. No, I think everybody is cooperating with the evenings, about the evenings as well. Counsel for Mr. Singh?
Chairperson, as far as possible, we will definitely cooperate. As you might or
Yes.
might not be aware, sometimes there's prearranged
Yes.
meetings,
Yeah.
but we will deal with it as they come up.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. I'm sure it's the same with you, Mr. Singh.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Yes, okay. Okay, I'll try and make sure the dates are sorted out as soon as possible. Thank you to everybody who will adjourn for the day. just for the benefit of the public, on Monday, there will be no hearing, but on Tuesday and the days after that, next week, there will be evidence relating to ESCOM. We adjourn.